It's 4:25 in the morning, somewhere on the outskirts of Monterrey, Mexico. A man is sitting in his car on the side of a highway. Standing outside of the car, just a few feet from his passenger door, is an 18-year-old girl, Debanhi Escobar. She's alone, and it's dark, and there's nothing around them. Just roadside motels, trucking companies, and a whole lot of empty land. It's the kind of place where if you screamed, nobody would hear you. And this man, he's looking at her, and he doesn't really know what to do because this girl, she won't get back in the car. She's staying put. Also, she won't tell him where she lives. And she's not even going to call her parents. And her friends, the ones who asked him to drive her home in the first place, they gave him the wrong address. And now they're not picking up. So he does something strange. He picks up his phone and he takes a picture of Debanhi, just standing there on the side of the road, looking away from him. And then he just drives away. The young girl, she just stands there now, alone in the dark, on the side of a highway in one of the most dangerous areas in Mexico. And that one photo, the one this man took, would go on to be shared millions of times. It would be plastered on every news channel in Mexico, picked up internationally, and spark massive protests that shook the country completely. In fact, it would trigger the largest search operation Mexico had seen in years. And the story behind it, what happened to Debanhi after this photo was taken, it is one of the darkest stories I've personally ever encountered. If you've seen that photo before, I think you already know that it doesn't end well. But before we go any further, I really need to give you guys a heads up on this one because this case gets incredibly dark, okay? And I'm talking about very, very, very graphic details. So if that's not something that you're ready for today, then I totally get it. Just skip on and I'll see you in the next one. But for everybody else, viewer discretion is seriously advised. So how does an 18-year-old girl end up standing alone on the side of a highway at 4:25 in the morning in one of the most dangerous areas in Mexico? Well, it all starts with a phone call on April 8th, 2022. Around 10 p.m., Debanhi Escobar gets a call from a friend, a girl named Sarai. She wants to know if Debanhi wants to come out tonight. I mean, there's parties, there's drinks, it's a Friday, and Debanhi, she doesn't even hesitate. She says, yes, of course, that sounds like a fun time. Now, her parents, a couple named Mario and Dolores, they hear this and they're like, not tonight. Because the next day they had a family trip planned. And if she's out all night, she's going to be exhausted, right? Parent logic, just general parent logic. It makes sense. Don't go out tonight. You can go tomorrow. But she's 18. And like any teenager, she insists, please let me go, And eventually, they let her go. And now Debanhi, she does something before she leaves that probably a lot of teenagers, they wouldn't bother doing. She tells her parents exactly where she's going, the address, and who she's going to be with. Basically, she just wants to completely keep them in the loop of what her plans are tonight, which is what makes this night feel so impossibly cruel in hindsight. But right now, at this moment, none of that matters. It's a Friday night. She's 18. She's going to go out with her friends. She's going to have a wonderful night. And her parents, they trust her. So they say, all right, fine. Go have fun. Have a great night. Around 10:47, Sarai pulls up to Debanhi's house with two other girls, Yvonne and Alejandra. It's a full-on girls' party. Now, these girls, they aren't Debanhi's closest friends. They're just people that she'd been hanging out with through Sarai for probably like 3 or 4 months. At this point, she barely really knows them. They're the kind of friends where you would go out together, but you probably wouldn't call them in 3 a.m. if something went wrong, And that distinction between real friends and people that you just party with, that's really going to matter tonight. Because when things start falling apart, you are going to watch these girls make a series of decisions that real friends, they would never make. And later, when Debanhi's own cousin comes forward about what these girls actually said about that night, it's going to reframe everything you're about to hear. So the four of them, they head out. And for the first few hours, it's a pretty standard Friday night. They're hopping between parties, they're grabbing drinks. At one point in the night, they call a DD driver named Juan David Cuellar to take them between a few locations. Also, I apologize if I butcher any Spanish pronunciations throughout this video. Okay, back to the story. And Yvonne, she does something very smart here, okay? She saves David's number so that she can call him later for a safe ride home. Because in Monterey, disappearances are such a real and everyday thing that even just getting into a ride-hailing app felt safer if you already knew the driver. Like, I'm sure you guys probably feel the same way, right? David, he agrees and says that he is on shift until 6 a.m., so they can call him whenever. Eventually, around 2:20 in the morning, they end up at a place called Quinta del Diamante, and they end up staying there for probably about 2.5 hours. And this is where things start to go awry. Now, according to Sarahi and Yvonne, Debanhi was by far the most intoxicated person there that night. They said that she was constantly drinking straight bottles of vodka. Even though that they would take the bottle away from her, she would just appear with it again, literally 2 minutes later. And she was not going to stay still. She was all over the place. She kept running off and disappearing with her friends, disappearing out of sight. And they had to keep finding her and pulling her back and pulling her away from dangerous situations. At one point, there was a guy at the party that comes up to Sarahi and Yvonne and says, "Hey, take this girl away. She's causing trouble. She's not well. You can't even understand what she's saying." And okay, like, at this point, you're probably thinking, yeah, she's like really, really drunk, right? Teenage girl, just too much vodka. It happens. It does. It happens. But later CCTV footage from the venue's security camera shows Debanhi leaving the Quinta alone in a completely drunken haze. Like, she's not there. And then there's this guy. He comes after her and he grabs her. But Debanhi, she turns around and she slaps him. She doesn't stop there, because she even goes as far as biting him. Noticing the altercation, her friends run over, and they're trying to separate the two. So, yeah, I think that sums it up. It was a very, very chaotic and very ugly night. Debanhi, she was in an awful state. Whether it was from alcohol or something else entirely, she was not great. To top it all off, she was also kind of furious with her friends at this point. And she decides, I'm done. I want to leave. And in hindsight, this would turn out to be the worst decision of her life. Around 3:30 in the morning, Yvonne texts David, the DD driver from earlier, if you recall, and she asks him, I need you to come and pick Debanhi up, and I need you to take her home. Now, David, he shows up around 3:50, and for some reason we will never understand, only Debanhi gets in. The security camera at the Quinta del Diamante confirms this all in footage. Debanhi gets in, and immediately, she starts telling David she needs to go. Go, 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 go. Start it. Drive, drive, drive. She's in a hurry. She wants to get out of here. And then Sarahi and Yvonne, they come up to the car window and they talk to David for a few seconds and they tell him, Debanhi, she's really sick. She needs to get home. Can you take her home? Great. And then they walk away. They just walk away. She's not their problem anymore. And before we go further, I really need you to understand who they just walked away from. Because Debanhi Escobar, she was so much more than just a girl at a party. She was a law student at the Autonomous University of Nuevo León. 18 years old, she had already chosen to build her life around the belief that the broken justice system in Mexico, which everyone else had given up on, could actually work. That the women who disappear every day in Mexico could get something more than just a case number that just collects dust. In fact, just a few weeks before this night, she had marched alongside thousands of women on International Women's Day, holding signs for girls that she'd never met, girls whose names nobody remembers anymore. And right now, this is the same girl who's sitting in the back of a stranger's car at 4 a.m, and things are about to get very strange for her. David asks Debanhi for her home address so he can take her there, and she flat out refuses. She says she doesn't know him and she doesn't trust him. She will not tell him where she lives. Okay, he's frustrated, but fine, whatever. So David contacts Yvonne over WhatsApp. He asks for Debanhi's address and Yvonne sends one. But brace yourself for this, right? It is the wrong address. So they get there, and you wouldn't believe it. It is the middle of an empty road. Nothing around. No houses, no buildings, nothing. The friends gave the wrong address to a stranger who was supposed to be driving their drunk female friend home safely. So David tries again. He asks Yvonne for Debanhi's parents' phone number this time. Maybe he could just talk to Mario and Dolores directly, and they can figure this out, right? But Yvonne, she doesn't send the number of Debanhi's parents. At this point, Debanhi's phone is completely dead. David offers her his car charger so she can plug it in, and she accepts. But as soon as it's charged, she doesn't make any calls. She doesn't even want to call her mom, who she pretty much tells everything to. She's not willing to make that call. So now you've got this situation where David is driving around with this highly intoxicated 18-year-old girl at 4 a.m. He has no idea where she lives. Her parents gave the wrong address, and they won't give him, her parents' phone number. And Debanhi herself, she doesn't want to cooperate. So what is he supposed to do here? What is he supposed to do? Here is where it gets really interesting and also pretty terribly sad. Because during this ride, Debanhi says some pretty bizarre things. And I want you to really listen to these because people have been analyzing them ever since. At first she says, they're bad friends because they didn't want to take me with them. She's talking about her two friends here, but hold on. Because we come to know later that when Sarahi and Yvonne talked to the police in an interview, they told them something totally different. They said Debanhi wanted to be alone, that she didn't want them to come with her, and that she told them that she wanted to be alone. But that's not what Debanhi is saying right now. That is not what Debanhi is saying right now. Right now, in this car, she is telling David that her friends excluded her, that they didn't want her to be with them. It's weird, right? Like they were going somewhere, and they just left her behind. So which is it? Did Debanhi want to be alone? Or did her friends not want her around? One of those versions is a total lie. But then she says something even more puzzling that people have been trying to make sense of ever since. Debanhi looks at David and she says, "My parents deserve to know the truth." And David goes, "What truth?" And then she just says, "The truth." That's it, okay? She doesn't say anything else. She doesn't explain. She stops. What truth? What is she talking about? The truth about what happened at the party? The truth about her friends? The truth about something someone maybe did to her? We don't know. Whatever it was that teenage Debanhi knew or felt or even experienced that night, she never got to tell anyone. Not even her parents. Then there's a third thing that she says. "My parents are lawyers. They'll put you in jail if anything happens to me." Now, her parents aren't actually lawyers. In fact, Mario and Dolores, they're teachers who are part of a union. But David doesn't know that. And the way he takes this, well, he gets scared. He is now worried that if anything happens to this girl, he's going to be the one blamed for it. So, at some point, David actually tries to take her back to Quinta del Diamante, and they get there. But the party's over by now. It's empty. And Debanhi, she doesn't want to get out. So now what? David asks her again and again, "Call your mom." But Debanhi ignores him. And David, he makes a fateful decision to let her go. Right now, they're at kilometer 15.5 in the highway of Nuevo Laredo in the Nueva Castilla area. And right now, and I need you to understand what kind of place this is. This particular stretch of highway had a reputation. Women had been arrested here, had gone missing here. In Nuevo Leon alone, around 300 women had disappeared in just the first few months of 2022. And a lot of those cases started on roads exactly like this one. Just to kind of paint this picture for you, the roadside motels on these types of roads, they have their lights off. The trucking companies sit behind chain link fences. And the empty lots, they stretch out into nothing. Also, there's 0 streetlights. And nobody is walking on the road at 4 a.m. At least nobody that has a choice. But strangely, Debanhi gets out of the car for some reason. And then she just stands there on the gravel. She's just looking away from David. She just stands there. She's looking almost defiant. And David, he just watches. He doesn't leave immediately because, honestly, he's starting to feel a little disturbed about this situation, and I don't blame him. He just sits there with the engine running, just watching her through the window. He's smart. He's a smart guy. He knows that you don't just leave a teenage girl on the side of the road. But he also knows that if he grabs her and forces her back into the car, his life is over. So he does something that will change the story entirely. He picks up his phone and he takes that photo. Just one. And then he puts the car into gear and he drives away. As the sound of his engine fades out, all there is left is just a girl on the highway at 4 a.m. with no phone, no ride, and no one coming for her. And that photo that he took would be shared millions of times in the weeks to come. It would be printed on posters, broadcasted on every news channel, carried through the streets by protesters. But right now, it is just a file on a stranger's phone, and the girl in it is still alive. He takes this photo to prove and to document that Debanhi got out of his car alive, and that he didn't force her out, and that he didn't do anything to her. And to top it all off, he sends it to Yvonne with a message. There she is. Come and get her. And he includes his location so they know where she is. And do you know what Yvonne says back? Thanks, but we don't know what to do. She's unbearable. So their 18-year-old friend is alone on a dark highway at 4:25 a.m. in one of the most dangerous areas in Mexico, and their response is basically, not our problem. They don't even call emergency services or her parents. Look, I'm not here to do internet detective stuff, but I am saying that response is chilling. Now, I'm going to be really careful here because I don't want to accuse someone of something that I frankly can't prove, but I need you to hold on to the way that these two friends behave tonight, okay? With every weird decision that they made, from the wrong address to this moment right here, things just don't add up, okay? The puzzle pieces, they don't fit together. Because when you see where Debanhi ends up and what she does to get there, you're going to have questions about Sarahi and Yvonne. And honestly, no one can answer these questions to this day. Seeing this non-cooperation from them, David sends one more voice message to the friends. He says, I can't force her into the car because if I do, people might think I'm a rapist or a kidnapper. Don't be mean and come and get her. She was with you. She's in a bad way. I was going to take her home, but she wouldn't let me. And then, because that's really all he can do, he just drives away. Now, before we move on from this ride, there was one more thing I still have to tell you, and it is something that came out a bit later that might explain a lot of what happened that night to Debanhi. And you might not see this coming. There is footage from inside David's car during this ride, and in that footage, David appears to touch Debanhi inappropriately and without her consent. David has denied this, of course, but if it is true, think about what that means. I mean, that would explain why Debanhi was so desperate to get out of his car, right? Why she was completely refusing to cooperate with him, why she wouldn't give him her address, why she wouldn't call her parents, why she would not do anything to keep her inside that vehicle for 1 second longer than she had to be. It might even explain what she meant when she said her parents deserve to know the truth. Think about that. And here's the thing that just sits with me, okay? Whether David harassed her or not, or whether he's the worst person in the world or just a guy that made bad decisions in a terrible situation, one fact remains. He left an 18-year-old girl alone on a dark highway, and the police were never called. Even if you give him every benefit of the doubt under the sun, that part is still impossible to defend. By now, it's 4:25 in the morning, and David just took that photo and drove off. And like I mentioned before, there was basically nothing. There was no one around her. Her phone is dead, and there's definitely no one coming to get her. About 4 minutes later, at 4:29, a security camera at a transport company called Alcosa captures Debanhi crossing the street. And I want you to pay attention to the way that she's moving, because it was shown that she was walking with a very firm, determined stride. There is no staggering, no stopping to steady herself. For a girl her friends claimed was so drunk that she was unbearable and couldn't even be understood when she spoke, she's walking perfectly straight. The math is not mathing, is it? But then in a separate piece of footage, she is seen trying to cross the road without paying attention to traffic. And there is a semi-trailer that actually has to brake really hard to avoid hitting her. So she's alert enough to walk in a straight line, but not alert enough to watch for oncoming trucks. Which again, raises the question, was she actually drunk? Or was something else in her system that night? A little while later, she reaches the Alcosa entrance. And there is a light on inside of the security booth, so she pokes her head in, she looks inside, and there's no one there. So instead, she tries to open the gate, but it's locked. So what else can she do? She keeps walking. But there is something important here that immediately struck everyone as strange. She is never seen on camera leaving Alcosa through the front, which means that the route she took between Alcosa and the next place she shows up in is completely unknown. And this is where we hit the first major gap, because between 4:29 and where she appears at the Nueva Castilla motel, there are 13 minutes where no camera picks her up. 13 minutes, right during this exact window when Debanhi would have been passing through this area. She's just gone. Now, this part is very interesting because the company that owns the camera, Alcosa, has direct connection to someone whose name will surface later in this case in a very disturbing way. That 13-minute gap is going to look a lot less like a coincidence when it does. But right now, all we know is that that footage is missing. At 4:33, she reappears. A security camera at the Nueva Castilla Motel's restaurant, which is a separate circular building on the motel grounds that was actually out of service at the time, captures a silhouette running past the street-facing glass door. 2 minutes later, another camera at the motel's reception booth shows Debanhi running around the outside of the restaurant building. Weirdly enough, she's running alone. In none of the footage is anyone chasing her or following her. So why is she running? And then around 4:37, the restaurant's interior camera picks her up again. She's at the large glass windows, looking inside. She peers into the dark, empty restaurant. She's looking around, like she's looking for someone. Or she could just be looking for a way in. She tries the glass door from the garden side, but it's locked. So she keeps moving. And then there's another gap of 17 minutes with no camera picking her up. And then, at around 4:54, she is walking along the walls that separate the motel's garden area from the street. She heads to the left and toward the back of the property. And by then, she's out of frame. And after that, nothing. Debanhi Escobar is never seen again. But the cameras, they weren't done recording. About an hour after the last sighting, around 5:44, the restaurant camera captures something. It is a millisecond, like a long flash of a silhouette in the window. It was like a blink and you miss it kind of moment, like a pop-up, it appears and then disappears instantly. Most news outlets, they didn't mention this detail, but it is bizarre if you think about it. However, it gets stranger. 3 minutes later, at 5:47, a van drives up and parks directly in front of the restaurant's street-facing door. It stays for maybe 3 minutes, and then it leaves. Nobody has officially connected that van to anything, However, we know that it showed up at the exact spot and the exact time right after the flash of movement. But later in this case, a leaked audio recording surfaces that might explain exactly what that van was doing there. And when you hear it, it changes everything we know about this night. So here is what we have so far. Debanhi Escobar has not been seen or heard from since 4:54 in the morning on April 9th. Her phone is dead, and she is not at her parents' house and not with her friends. She is just gone. For Mario and Dolores Escobar, the next 12 days are going to be the worst of their lives. They are going to live through every parent's worst nightmare. The morning of Saturday, April 9th, Mario Escobar wakes up and checks his phone, and he's got multiple missed calls from Sarahi from the night before. He walks into Debanhi's room, and she's not there. No calls from her, no messages, nothing explaining where she is. No, hey dad, I'm at a friend's house, nothing like that. So he calls Sarahi back. And Sarahi and Yvonne tell him what happened. About the party, about the fighting, about the ride with David, and the photo on the highway. All of it. And Mario, he immediately knows that there's something wrong. So he doesn't wait. He goes straight to the police and files a missing persons report. And unlike a lot of the missing persons cases in Mexico, where families are told to wait 72 hours before anyone will even lift a finger, which happens so much, the police actually respond quite quickly to this one. Maybe it's because of the circumstances, that it being, an 18-year-old girl alone on a dangerous highway at 4 a.m. Or maybe it's because Mario refused to take no for an answer. Either way, they start working from day one. Police begin questioning the friends and the driver, and all three hand over their phones. And David's photograph, that quickly becomes their starting point, because it shows exactly where Debanhi was last seen and in what condition. And when that photo is released to the public, it goes absolutely everywhere. Within hours, it's on every channel in Mexico, and within days, it's international. I think that the reason that it spread so fast is because of what the image actually looks like. This is not a typical missing persons poster. A haunting image of a young woman standing completely alone in the dark on the side of a highway. It kind of looks like a still from a horror film, in my opinion. And I think most people saw it, and they felt something for this young girl. Soon enough, the hashtag Justice for Debanhi starts trending as well. But something wasn't right. And people started noticing it almost immediately. A YouTuber named Mafian TV went to search the area with his camera, and he started a live stream, kind of near the motel area. And while he was filming, he showed something that many found deeply unsettling. There was a lot of security cameras everywhere in that area. On businesses, on buildings, on gates, even cameras pointing at the road, and parking lots, and at all the entrances. The whole place is littered with cameras. But when the investigators actually started going through these businesses and asking for the recordings, something really strange began to happen. The Nueva Castilla Motel, where Debanhi was last seen, kept claiming that their system didn't record. Live broadcast only, and no hard drive. So whatever happened on that property, there's no way of seeing it. That's what they said. And a tool company located directly on the path between El Cosa and the motel, they didn't even bother with an excuse. They just said no. Suspicious? I think yes. And if you're thinking, okay, maybe these businesses, they just didn't want the hassle, okay? Maybe it's not that deep. You have to understand something about how things work in certain parts of Mexico. There is a phrase that people use. No pasa nada. Nothing happens. Nothing gets investigated, and nothing gets solved. In Mexico, as many as 95% of crimes go unpunished. 95%. How mind-boggling is that? That is a system that was never built to work in the first place. And when you operate in an environment like that, cooperation becomes optional, right? Because who's going to make you? No one. The police who can't solve anything, the prosecutors who lose evidence. When the consequences of stonewalling are basically zero, silence becomes the default. And the people who suffer most with that silence are always the same, right? Young women and their families. But Mario didn't stop. He simply couldn't. He started searching for his daughter from 8 in the morning until midnight, every single day. He would follow every lead, real or fake. It did not matter. He wanted his daughter back. And if all of that wasn't bad enough, he endured extortion calls from people demanding money in exchange for information about his daughter. Just sit with that. How awful do people have to be, right? Meanwhile, the search operation kept growing and growing and quickly becoming one of Mexico's most prolific cases. 200 personnel, search dogs, drones, volunteers, all combing every inch of that highway, every field, every ditch. But there was one particular location that they kept circling back to, the Nueva Castilla Motel, the last place that Debanhi had been seen on camera. They went through that property over and over, okay? They checked the buildings, the grounds, the cisterns, and there was nothing. Every time they checked it out, clean. But through all of it, Mario held hope. Because what else can you do as a parent? And then on April 16th, after sitting with authorities and reviewing security camera footage together, Mario came out and said something that, honestly, knowing what's coming is one of the hardest things in this entire case to hear. He said, "I know my daughter is alive. I feel it in my heart." Okay, let me tell you something more about this family because it's going to matter for what you're about to hear. Debanhi, she was adopted. When she was about 1 year and 4 months old, Mario and Dolores took her in. The family has never publicly shared the full circumstances, and that's their right. But what we know is that Mario had no biological children of his own. Debanhi wasn't his by blood. She was his by choice. And when asked about it later, Mario said something that tells you everything you need to know about this man. He said, "I am not the biological father. I'm the father. Because a father isn't the one who begets. It's the one who raises." For 18 years, that is exactly what he did. She was their only child and practically their whole world. Everything in that household, it revolved around her. Even at 18, when most kids are pulling away from their parents and fighting them about every little thing, Debanhi, Mario, and Dolores, they were genuinely close. They were really close. Unusually close, even for a tight-knit family. Dolores, her mother, by this point, she was barely sleeping. She was barely eating. And she said publicly, "I need to find my daughter because I don't want to go back home and find that emptiness that she left. She is our only daughter. We adore her. Sweetheart, come back." She's just a mom that misses her baby. Just 5 days after Mario said that he knew his daughter was alive, that hope was shattered. It's April 22nd. It has been 13 days since Debanhi disappeared. 12 days of searching, of Mario and Dolores running on hope and adrenaline and the desperate belief that their teenage daughter is still out there somewhere alive. On that day, the search was sent somewhere else. Mario would later say, the team received a tip that morning, sending them to a completely different location. The motel was now left unattended for hours. Nobody was watching it. Nobody was there. And then that evening, motel employees reported a smell. And this isn't something like spoiled in the fridge or drain backed up, right? This is something fetid and heavy. The kind of smell that makes you take a step back before your brain can even process what it is. And it was coming from one of the cisterns. Now you need to understand what we're talking about here because the layout of this place matters a lot, okay? Behind the restaurant, there is a garden, completely enclosed by a 2.6 meter high wall with barbed wire that runs along it. Most importantly, there are no exits to this street, no vehicle access from outside. And within that garden, there are 3 underground cisterns. These are square openings at ground level that lead down into shafts about 4 meters deep. They're used for water storage. 2 of them were open, with no lids. There was water at the bottom, probably about maybe 90 centimeters deep. And between where Debanhi was last seen on camera and the nearest cistern, the distance was probably about just 11 meters. Now, while the employees initially thought, maybe this is just a gas leak or just some chemical issue, because that makes more sense, somewhere in the back of their minds, they most probably knew that it wasn't gas. Honestly, they probably did. Police were called, and then they descended into the cistern. And what they find in there... Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. This is the part of the case that made me feel like physically and mentally uncomfortable. I had to stop many times. I'm not kidding. But I think it is important that you understand what they found because it matters with everything that's about to come up next. Now, this cistern is about 4 meters deep, okay? And at the bottom, submerged in about 90 centimeters of dark, very stagnant water, there is a body. Please take care of yourself here, okay? If you need to pause, please do it. If you prefer to skip ahead, do so. And because of how advanced the decomposition was, they couldn't visually identify her at first. So police collected a sample and they sent it off and they waited. And on April 22nd, the results came back. It was her. It was 18-year-old Debanhi. And when Mario finds out, when someone tells him that they have found his daughter's body in that cistern, he comes out of the motel and he is just full on sobbing. I mean, he's completely broken. The first thing out of his mouth, it's not silence. It's, "My daughter is dead. I don't know what to do." And then almost immediately after that, Mario says something that just really stuck with me, okay? He says, "She was planted. She was alive for several days. Somebody put her here." Interestingly, there's even a term for this situation in Mexico. It's called sembrado. It means something or someone is placed somewhere deliberately without authorization. And in this context, that is exactly what Mario is saying, right? Debanhi's body wasn't found where she died. It was placed in that cistern by someone. And here's how we know. The motel had been searched on at least 4 separate occasions before they found her body. 4 separate searches with dogs, personnel, volunteers, and they found nothing. But then, suddenly, on the 5th search, there she is. Which means her body could have been put there after those first 4 searches had already happened. Someone waited and placed her there when the motel was left unattended. Or the motel is involved too. We still don't know. Then, a few days after the body is recovered, investigators search the cisterns again. And what they find makes this case extremely disturbing. Debanhi's body was in one cistern, while her handbag was found in the second, and her cell phone and keys were found in the third. That's 3 separate underground tanks for one girl's belongings. And that's something that really troubled investigators. These cisterns are separate structures, connected only by a thin passage at the very top, which means that there is no way for objects to migrate naturally between them. Simply put, someone put her belongings in different places. And someone may have messed up which cistern got what. But this isn't the only disturbing detail that investigators flagged. A ladder was found near the cistern. But earlier search teams specifically noted that the ladder was not there before. It wasn't there during any of the previous searches. So someone placed it there afterward. If this is where the story ended, it would be tragic enough. But what the autopsies are about to reveal, it changes everything. And it proves that the people who were supposed to find the truth were actively trying to bury it. This is where things get incredibly disturbing. After Debanhi's body was recovered, the Nuevo Leon Attorney General's office performed an autopsy, and their conclusion was extremely convenient. They said Debanhi died from a deep skull contusion, a single impact to the forehead. Their theory was she wandered into the motel grounds in the dark, didn't see the open cistern, and fell in. And when she fell in, she hit her head and she died. A tragic, simple accident and nothing more. If that conclusion sounds familiar, it should. Because this is what the system has done for decades. In the 1990s, hundreds of women were murdered, and their bodies were dumped in the desert. Some were mutilated beyond recognition. And do you know what investigators said then? It was just gang violence. They were caught in domestic disputes. And the worst of them all, the women were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Are you kidding me? Case after case was written off with the simplest possible explanation. As evidence disappeared and families were told to stop asking questions, things would just move on. What else could be done, right? That was 30 years ago. And here we are again, with an 18-year-old girl in a cistern and an attorney general's office saying that she just fell in. But even in their own report, this didn't add up because there was no water found in her lungs. None at all. None at all. So we know that she didn't drown. You could argue, okay, maybe the impact killed her before she went under. Sure. But they also didn't run a toxicology report. And when people asked why, the prosecutor's office said that the body, it didn't meet the conditions for testing. And just like that, the most important question in this entire case got slammed shut. Because the thing is, there is a substance that is well documented in Mexico and Colombia. It is called burundanga. Some people know it as scopolamine. Others will call it devil's breath. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because of what it does to people. Someone who's been given it, they can still walk. They can still talk. From the outside, they may look like they're functioning, but in reality, they're not fully there. They can become extremely suggestible and act erratically. They can be lucid one moment and then completely gone the next. Afterward, they often have no memory of what happened. And to a stranger watching from the outside, a person under its effects, they can almost look indistinguishable from someone who is like extremely drunk. Now, I'm not saying that Debanhi was drunk that night. I don't know that. And nobody knows that. Because the one test that could have answered it, that was never run. Never. But I want you to think about something. Think about the Alcosa footage. The way Debanhi was walking perfectly in a straight line, with purpose and with direction. And then minutes later, she nearly walks into a semi-trailer. Alert 1 second, gone the next. Think about what her friends said, too. They said that she was drunk, that she was unbearable. And then, think about what she said in David's car. My parents deserve to know the truth. They're bad friends because they didn't want to take me with them. Those are clear, coherent, and specific thoughts, right? Think about why she refused to call her mother. I mean, Debanhi, she told her parents everything. Her mom was her closest confidant. And yet, in the back of the car, with a charged phone in her hand, she's not making the call. Why? What 18-year-old girl, alone and scared at 4 a.m, doesn't make a call to her mom? Unless she couldn't fully understand what was happening to her. Or unless whatever was in her system made her feel like she was making rational decisions when she really wasn't. What I'm trying to say is that a toxicology report, it would have answered all of this. One test. Just one test. That's all that we would have needed, right? It's all we needed to know whether Debanhi's behavior that night was alcohol or something entirely different. And by extension, whether what happened to her was planned from the moment that she arrived at the party. But the prosecutor's office decided not to run one. And now, because of the time, that window is closed. I'm going to let you decide for yourself whether you think that this is incompetence or something else entirely. I'll leave that to you. But Mario, her father, he didn't buy any of it. Not even for 1 second. He said, "That is not true. I have a feeling they're hiding things from me, and I am going to start digging until I find the truth." So that's exactly what he did. He hired his own forensics team. And on May 13th, their findings went public, and they demolished everything known from the first autopsy. The second autopsy found that Debanhi wasn't struck once. She was struck repeatedly on the head with a heavy, blunt object from multiple angles. There were bruises on both sides of her frontal skull, eyelids, nose, lips, and even above her ear. The report stated this, and their wording matters. The craniofacial contusions are of external origin, and because they are intense, repeated, with different angles of impact, it follows that they were caused by another person, and it was a violent homicidal death. It is now confirmed that someone beat this girl, this kid, to death. But somehow, it got even worse from here. The second autopsy found bruising in the genital area, consistent with SA, which is something the first autopsy apparently didn't even look for. But it's the final finding that changed the trajectory of this case. Debanhi was already dead before her body entered the water. That means she didn't hit her head and fall into the cistern. She was killed somewhere else, and then someone moved her there. So now you've got the government saying accident, and an independent team saying violent homicide with signs of SA. Two completely opposite conclusions about the same girl. Understandably, the public lost it. There were massive protests. Mario demanded accountability on every platform that would have him, and the pressure got so intense that the government was forced to order a third autopsy. This one was different, though. They exhumed Debanhi's body after she had been buried for 68 days in the municipal cemetery of Galeana. The examination was conducted by the director of the Institute of Forensic Sciences, backed by an accredited expert from UN Women. This was supposed to be the definitive answer, right? This is the answer. Yet somehow, it contradicted both of the previous autopsies. According to this, the cause of death was asphyxiation by suffocation. But the results didn't specify what. Unfortunately, that's not even the finding that shattered the family's faith in the system, no. Because the second autopsy, the independent one that Mario paid for, found bruising consistent with sexual assault. And the third autopsy said that there were no signs of sexual violence. Not at all. So now you have 3 autopsies of the same girl with 3 completely different stories. They can't agree with how she was killed or whether she was assaulted. They can't agree on anything. So whoever is right and whoever is wrong and whoever is lying, the only person who knows the truth is the person who killed her. The 3rd autopsy also examined the state of decomposition and determined that Debanhi had been dead for only 3 to 5 days before the body was discovered on April 22nd. Let's just sit with that for a second, okay? Just sit with that. Because the math here is simple and it's beyond devastating, okay? If Debanhi was found on April 22nd and she'd only been dead for 3 to 5 days, that means she died around April 16th to 18th at the earliest. She disappeared on April 9th, which means that for 8 to 10 days after she walked out of that camera frame, after David drove away and after her friends went home and after her phone died and after the whole country started searching, Debanhi was still alive. This means one thing, and one thing only, right? Someone had her. They were holding her somewhere while 200 people searched for her. 200 people combed that highway while they had drones flying overhead and dogs sweeping the area. And if you remember what Mario said on April 16th, that he knew his daughter was alive, he was right. He was so right. On April 16th, his daughter was almost certainly still alive. His gut instinct, or whatever you want to call it, it was telling him the truth. And nobody around him believed it mattered. Because the search teams were right there on that highway. They searched the motel property 4 separate times. And Debanhi, she might have been meters away from them, inside one of those buildings that they walked past. One of those doors that businesses refused to open, and they still didn't find her. Whether that's because they weren't looking in the right place, or because someone made sure that they wouldn't, we don't know. When Mario heard the 3rd autopsy results, he said something that I think tells you everything about the kind of man that he is. He wasn't relieved. He wasn't almost vindicated, I suppose. He'd been saying this since the moment that they found her body. And now there was proof. He said, and I quote, "We can now speak of femicide, which is what we have always believed. But sadly, the people who were supposed to find her killer, they couldn't even agree on how she was killed." And that's kind of terrifying in itself. Because if the authorities can't figure out how she was killed, how are they ever going to figure out who did it? What happened to Debanhi? This is the part where everyone has an opinion. Debanhi was held for over a week, suffocated to death, and then someone planted her body in a cistern that had been searched 4 times. And 3 autopsies couldn't agree on how she died. Which means that the question is way beyond who killed Debanhi Escobar. It's actually who made sure nobody would ever find out. That's really the question here, isn't it? In the months that followed, as investigators and journalists and the internet started pulling every loose thread in this case, the picture, it started forming, and it was honestly a lot worse than anyone had expected. It started with the obvious suspect, David the driver, the last known person to be with Debanhi alive, the man who took the photo that blew up the internet. He was arrested on April 10th, 2 days after she disappeared, right? But here's the problem with David as the killer. He was in police custody within 48 hours. If Debanhi was alive until April 16th, David, he was definitely not the one keeping her. I mean, he was sitting inside a cell while she was out there, breathing, somewhere. While Mario was out searching from 8 in the morning to midnight every single day, walking past buildings his daughter might have been inside of. 2 days after his arrest, they let David go because there just wasn't enough evidence to hold him. But then, on the exact same day, he was picked up again on a completely unrelated drug charge, which tells you a lot about the kind of person that he is, but it does not tell you that he killed Debanhi. Meanwhile, investigators started looking elsewhere, and that's when things got really uncomfortable. Because remember the motel? The place where Debanhi was last seen on camera? The property that was searched 4 separate times before her body appeared on the 5th? 2 employees at that motel, Anna Luisa and Alida Urith, were eventually charged, but not with murder or kidnapping or anything that matched the scale of what happened to an 18-year-old girl on their property. Nothing like that. They were brought in for making false statements and concealing evidence. What that means, in practical terms, is this. While Mario Escobar was standing outside that hotel during those searches, and while Dolores was at home unable to sleep because her daughter's bed was still empty, these 2 women knew something. They had information that could have changed the course of this entire search. But they chose to keep it to themselves. They told investigators that there was no video footage of Debanhi on the motel premises, but it turns out that was a blatant lie. When the police eventually searched the motel and the women's homes, they seized cell phones, USB drives, and a laptop. And on those devices, footage. Footage of Debanhi at the motel. The footage they said didn't exist. What nobody has ever been able to answer, even 3 years later, is what exactly was on that footage. What did they see? What did they lie about? That information was never made public, not once. So you have 2 women formally charged with hiding something related to Debanhi's death, and to this day, nobody, not even the public, not even the family, knows exactly what they were hiding, or who they were hiding it for. Their sentence was reporting to a police officer once a week. That's it. That is the total legal consequences for concealing evidence in the death of a teenage girl whose father spent 12 days tearing himself apart looking for her, while they sat on information that could have brought her home. But while the official investigation crawled forward at the pace of a system designed to go absolutely nowhere, something surfaced online, and it blew this case wide open. A recording leaked. An audio allegedly from someone who worked at the motel. And what this person described, if it's true, it is a kind of thing that keeps you up at night, right? According to this recording, 2 men were staying in a room at the motel that night, in room 174. The employees had been told to direct anyone asking for Sarai and Yvonne, Debanhi's friends, to that room. Debanhi arrived, and she asked for her friends by name. Okay, we're going to stop there for a second because there's something that I haven't told you yet. After Debanhi disappeared, her cousin, Andrea Escobar, went to the police. And she told them that when the friends first spoke to investigators, before they had time to coordinate their story, they admitted something. They said that they had planned to play a joke on Debanhi that night, that the plan from the beginning was to abandon her. A joke. That's what they called it. They walked back later and they changed their statements. But Andrea, she had heard the original version, and she went straight to the authorities with it. Now think about what that means in the context of everything you've just heard, right? If abandoning Debanhi was the plan from the start, then the wrong address they gave David wasn't a mistake. Refusing to send her parents' number, that wasn't laziness. She's unbearable. Oh, that wasn't frustration. That was all part of it. However, it gets even worse. Because if Debanhi showed up at the motel asking for Sarai and Yvonne by name, that means someone told her to be there. Someone used her friends' names to to lure her to that room. And the question that has haunted this case ever since is, did Sarai and Yvonne know that their names were being used? And maybe, just maybe, the joke wasn't just about abandoning Debanhi at the party, but about making sure that she ended up somewhere specific and with someone specific. Alone. We already know from the CCTV footage that Debanhi was running around that motel, looking through the windows, trying the doors. And at the time, it seemed random. Just a drunk girl or drug girl, I don't know, stumbling around in the dark. It sounds believable enough, yeah. But she wasn't stumbling. She was looking for them because someone had told her that they were there. Which raises a very important question. Who told her? Sarai and Yvonne had already gone home. They had already left with a group of guys from the party. They were nowhere near that motel. So who was using their names? The recording goes further. It claims Debanhi went to the room. But within minutes, she came back out, and she was in extreme distress. She was sobbing hard, barely consolable. Roughly an hour later, she was found unconscious in that same room. Just think about what that means. Think about what happened in that room in the span of an hour. I can't even think about the terrible things that must have happened in that room within the span of 1 hour. Things that took an 18-year-old girl from conscious and just distressed to unconscious. Just think about the fact that while this is happening, her phone was dead. Her parents were asleep, not knowing that anything was wrong. And her friends, the ones whose names were used to get her there, were already home. The audio claims that her body was then removed from the motel and transported to a nearby property. And she was kept at a location connected to a transport company while the entire country searched for her. Furthermore, days later, when the time was right, her body was moved back to the hotel and placed in the cistern where she was eventually found. If that's true, then during those 12 days, Debanhi's body was being stored like cargo less than a mile away from where the search teams were walking. Now, the man that this audio points to is someone people started calling El Jaguar. His real name, though, is Gustavo Soto. And remember that 13-minute gap in Alcosta's footage? The transport company on the path that Debanhi, she walked that night, where she showed up on the cameras and she was looking for help and it was conveniently dark? Gustavo Soto's half-brother is directly connected to Alcosta. In fact, he is linked in the company's registration documents. Now, this audio recording has never been officially verified, so we don't know who recorded it or even where it came from. It could be completely fabricated. And I'm telling you that because the details are specific enough and disturbing enough that it's easy to hear them and just believe them. Gustavo Soto voluntarily went to the prosecutor's office and denied everything, saying that he was in Texas playing poker that night and provided a photo as his alibi. He even broke down crying on TikTok, saying that the accusations were destroying his life and his livelihood and even his relationships. So no charges were ever filed based on this recording. I'm here to tell you why people aren't letting it go. But even if you throw out the audio entirely, even if every single word on it is fake, the connections are still there. Alcosa and its missing 13 minutes, the business that refused to cooperate, those 2 motel employees who lied about footage that they had in their own homes, and that van that showed up at 5:47 in the morning, parked right out the front of the restaurant door for 3 minutes and then left. And then most importantly, a man whose family has a direct link to the exact stretch of road where the cameras went dark. That's a lot of smoke for there to not be a fire. Then, there's the detail that ties all of this into a pretty little bow. On April 22nd, the day that Debanhi's body was finally found, the search team, they weren't even at the motel. Mario said that they received a tip that morning sending them to a completely different location. The motel was left unattended for hours, and nobody was watching it. And then that evening, right on cue, motel employees reported a smell. And there she was, in a cistern that had been checked 4 times, next to a ladder that wasn't there during any of the previous searches. Also, with her belongings in a completely separate cistern that isn't even connected to the first. Someone put her there. And they did it during the window, that nobody was looking. Someone knew when the motel would be empty. And then they made sure that it would be empty by sending in a tip that pulled the search team away. Mario said he believes that his daughter was alive for days when they searched that motel. That she might have been meters away. That every time he stood outside waiting for the search teams to finish, she could have been behind one of those doors, one of those businesses that refused to open. Whether that is exactly how it happened, we may never know. The people responsible, whether it's one person or several, whether it's connected to El Jaguar or someone whose name who hasn't surfaced yet, who hasn't been caught. But there's one thing from this case that absolutely refuses to let go. My parents deserve to know the truth. That is what Debanhi said in David's car at 4 a.m. She never got to tell anyone what she meant. She never got to tell Mario or Dolores what happened to her that night, or what she knew, or what she was afraid of. And Mario, the man who chose her when she was a year old to be his daughter and promised to be her father, he has spent every day since trying to find that truth for her. Sadly, this is what justice looks like for Debanhi Escobar. And I have to say, it's not a lot. It's genuinely, shockingly not a lot. After the second autopsy went public, after the independent forensics team demolished the government's accidental fall theory, the pressure on Nuevo Leon Attorney's General Office became unbearable. The case was a national scandal, with international media covering it and protesters just swarming the streets. So the Attorney General's office, they did something. They dismissed 2 prosecutors from the case for what they called errors and omissions. That is what they called it when 2 prosecutors handled the death of a teenage girl so badly that the cause of death had to be determined 3 separate times. As if it were just a filing mistake. However, what followed was somehow even more insulting. In January 2024, Mario uploaded a video about 4 appeals being reviewed in court. The family was trying to get full access to the investigation file, because they still didn't have it, by the way. They were trying to formally link the motel employees to the broader murder investigation. They were also trying to extend the investigation timeline so prosecutors could actually do something. What nobody has ever been able to answer, even in the 3 years later, is what exactly these employees lied about. Why is their sentence limited to just reporting to a police officer once a week? It is unbelievable that this is the sum total of legal consequences for concealing evidence in the death of an 18-year-old girl. The timeline extension was also denied, despite the fact that no progress had been made. And let that sink in. A girl was held captive and killed. 3 autopsies contradicted each other, key witnesses were caught lying, and yet a judge decided the investigation, it's been given enough time, let it go. As for Sarai and Yvonne, the 2 friends who gave the wrong address and refused to send her parents' number, and they responded to a photo of their friend alone at 4 a.m. on a highway with "she's unbearable." The people who got into a car with a group of guys that they'd just met and went home without her. You would think at some point in this investigation, someone would have sat them down and asked them some very, very hard questions. Starting with, why does their version of events contradict what Debanhi told David in the car? That would be a strong one to start with. They said that she wanted to be alone, but Debanhi said that they didn't want her with them. One of those is a lie. And nobody ever pressed them on which one. Or why, if the leaked audio is even partially true, Debanhi showed up at the motel asking for them by name. Weird? Yes. Who told her they'd be there? And did Sarai and Yvonne know that their names were being used as bait? Another important question. As far as public records show, neither Sarai or Yvonne was ever formally investigated, charged, or held accountable in any way for what happened that night. How crazy is that? So whether they were involved in something darker, or whether they were just two young women who made a series of catastrophically selfish decisions that cost their friend her life, we genuinely don't know. And at this point, we probably never will. Eventually, because of the massive public pressure and the international attention, the case was taken over by the federal government. And you would probably think, okay, finally, someone competent is on this. But even after the federal takeover, there were no public updates, no announcements, and absolutely zero progress. And nobody could see what was happening inside of it anymore. But Mario kept pushing and kept demanding answers. He was putting pressure on anybody who would listen. Because he knew that if he stopped, even for a second, no one was going to fight for his daughter. No one else was going to help. The system had already shown him that. 3 years later, Debanhi's case, it's still open, but it's effectively stalled at this point. They've made no arrests. They still don't know who did it. In fact, the federal government still won't even call it what it is, a brutal femicide. What makes this even sadder is that Debanhi spent her short life trying to study law so she could fix the very system that failed her. And what makes this even sadder is that Debanhi spent her short life trying to study law so that she could fix the very system that failed her. Just so that other girls like her wouldn't disappear without answers. She marched in streets just weeks before that night, holding signs for women that she had never met. However, the world that she tried to fight for became the same world that swallowed her whole. And here's the thing that should genuinely terrify anyone paying attention to this case. While the entire country was focused on finding Debanhi, while millions of people were sharing her photo, while search teams were deployed, while volunteers desperately combed that highway, at least 80 other women went missing across Mexico during those same 2 weeks. 80. And during the search for Debanhi specifically, they found the bodies of 5 other women hidden along that same highway. And during the search for Debanhi specifically, they found the bodies of 5 other women hidden along that same highway. Women who had disappeared months or even years before. 4 of them were 16 or younger. And nobody was looking for them. Or at least not like they were looking for Debanhi. Because Debanhi had that photo, she had a face that the world could see. Most of those other women, they didn't have that. They just disappeared. And most of them are still gone. Mario and Dolores Escobar know this. And after everything, after the failed investigation, the cover-ups, the 3 autopsies that couldn't agree, the system that fought him at every turn, they still didn't stop. Mario proposed the creation of a national DNA bank so that families of disappeared women could at least identify their loved ones. Because he knows what it's like to not know. I mean, he lived it for 12 days, and it nearly destroyed him. In 2024, he said something that I personally have not been able to get out of my head since I started working on this case. We have to tell the authorities what needs to be said, but without fear. We have nothing to lose. I have nothing to lose on this path because what I loved most, I already lost. And to this day, Mario Escobar is still searching for the truth. Every single day, the same way he searched for his daughter. Thank you for diving into this case with me, and if you're also weirdly fascinated by true crime, then respectfully, hit subscribe. Why not? We post stories like this every single week. Be kind to your brain after this one, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!